Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the second webinar in our Hacker-Powered Security Report series. In our last webinar, Alice and I recapped the top 5 things that we thought were most important for you to take away from this year's Hacker-Powered Security Report, and you can access that session on demand on our website, HackerOne.com. This session goes a little bit deeper into the practical applications of the report findings. So, with us today, we have two HackerOne customers to tell us about how they interpret the findings and enhance their security programs, and one of our top researchers on the platform, Douglas Day, who goes by Archangel, to give us some insights from the other side. We'll kick off with introductions and then get into the discussion. So, to start us off, my name's Will Capsio. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at HackerOne. I've been at HackerOne for over 6 years now, and really excited to be here with you all today. I'm pleased to also introduce Brandon Laswell, senior security engineer at Lowe's. Brandon, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, thanks, Will. So, as he said, my name's Brandon Laswell, Senior Security Engineer at Lowe's. I've been with Lowe's for about 2 years now, in the industry for about 7 or a little bit more overall. We recently switched to HackerOne for the first time in my career, earlier in 2024, but Lowe's has used them in the past and kind of used that relationship to get back into it. Been very pleased with what I've seen so far.
Thank you, Brandon. We also have with us today Andrew Schofield, Senior Vice President of Information Security and IT Operations at Forge. Andrew?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today, Will. Yeah, I'm the head of information security and IT operations at Forge Global. We're a broker-dealer that provides liquidity to private companies before this is all pre-IPO. And happy to be here. I kicked off the HackerOne bug bounty program about 3 years ago, right after joining Forge. So looking forward to talking about it.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. And then finally, Douglas Day, our researcher, top researcher here on the HackerOne platform. Douglas?
Sure. My name is Douglas Day, or Archangel on HackerOne. I've been on the platform for a number of years. Actually, 2 weeks ago was the 6th year anniversary of my first bounty. And as long as there are customers like Andrew and Brandon, I'm sure I'll be here for another 6 years, if not more.
Awesome. Congrats on that anniversary. Had no idea. All right. So first, we encourage you to get your questions ready. We will spend the second half of the webinar answering them. Feel free to jot them down. Any questions that come to mind in the Q&A panel as we discuss the findings of the report here. We'll get to work to as many questions as we can at the end of the discussion. This session will also be recorded and emailed to you afterwards. So let's start things off by trying to understand the primary concerns from the organizational side. Andrew, what are the biggest threats to your organization, and how do researchers help you stay on top of them?
Yeah, so I think in this space, the unknown part is the concerning bit. Scanners find infrastructure vulnerabilities, static scanning finds code flaws, QA finds a lot of the user-focused issues. Engaging with the researchers on the HackerOne platform really brings a focus on exploiting the applications, kind of that very much creative kind of approach to, how can we exploit this? And I think, their job is to keep current on all this stuff, be leading edge to get those bounties. And so they're going to look at, each of these categories on, how best to take advantage of it. And so that's why I like partnering with you guys.
Yeah, they're certainly good at that. Brandon, what are some of the concerns you have as a retailer, specifically when it comes to security? What are you looking for from the researcher community in terms of like skill set or interest or expertise?
Yeah, so our biggest concern is probably just the volatility nature of technology. Everything's constantly changing. Change is the only constant. So when it comes to leveraging our partnership with HackerOne and our researchers, we do changed what skill sets we're looking for based off of whatever our new upcoming applications are focused on, whether they're specific structures that we're using or infrastructure or application types. Lately, some of the big ones that we've been focusing on is API endpoint or oriented. Um, so just really making sure we have the researchers test the specific use cases that we have in place and catching anything that falls through the cracks of the internal security measures we already put in place on ourselves.
Yeah, certainly the unknowns, if you will. Totally. Yeah, and as you can see from the chart, I think Gen AI might be the biggest unknown out there, certainly. Top of mind for many leaders. And I think that maybe isn't necessarily reflective of Gen AI itself so much as it is the unknown of like what it's connected to, what it's capable of, what it might do, how it might react to certain scenarios. Um, on the researcher side, Douglas, can you tell us a little bit about your unique approach to hacking and how it benefits the organizations that you hack on?
Sure. So I like to hit programs where they hurt. And so I'll take a look at what program I'm hacking on. If it's an e-commerce application, I'm going to be more interested in finding ways to manipulate prices. If I'm hacking on some education technology, find a way to maybe modify my grades if I'm acting as a student. If I'm working on a health tech company, I'll be looking for ways to get other people's like health records or diagnoses. And so I, a program that is working with me as a hacker should ideally be getting vulnerabilities that are catered to their industry or at least their application. Of course, I'll never not report something because it's you know not super critical, but I will try to direct my attention towards ways that will bring the most impactful vulnerabilities for that specific program.
Yeah, and so you very much fall in the manual exploitation half of this chart here, I imagine.
Oh
And
yeah.
that threat modeling, what is the technique that you're famous for when it comes to sniffing out what those companies don't want you to do, what those pain points are?
Yeah, so kind of my mantra is looking for no's. Whenever a company builds an application, there are restrictions in place, security boundaries, and you can usually find those either in the documentation where it'll say this type of user should not be able to perform action X, or maybe it'll say only user Y should be able to perform action Z. And so in my mind, that is the application saying, no, you cannot do this as this specific type of user, or no, you cannot access this feature without a higher subscription tier, or no, you cannot access this document unless it's been shared with you. And so every single one of those no's is an opportunity for a bug. That's not to say there's going to be a vulnerability there, but if you are able to bypass that security boundary, then that is typically a vulnerability that I'll report.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. So quickly, let's go into a brief overview of the hacker-powered security report. This is our eighth edition. These insights that we just covered and a few that are upcoming here are gathered from a global community of security researchers, as well as organizations that engage with them through bug bounty programs. So the report analyzes trends and vulnerabilities, security practices, and the evolving landscape of cybersecurity to help organizations understand how to better protect themselves. So again, let's dive back into the report here and discuss the mechanics of running programs. What are some of the main ways that you attract researchers to your program, Andrew, and how do you keep them coming back?
Yeah, I really view this as a partnership. The researchers are extensions of my own team. We invite researchers to come in, and they typically stay around. But how do we motivate them? So we're constantly communicating the new changes that are coming to the platform to kind of help point them at the new stuff. Because it's their time, right? They don't want to keep trying to exploit the same uh, code that they've looked at over the previous quarters. So we try and direct them at the new stuff. And on the flip side, we also want to be really responsive to them when they send us questions or requests for additional access or whatever, or when they submit bugs. We want to make sure we're hitting and getting back to them sooner than our SLA calls for. not only does that, reward them and let them know that we're engaged in the program, keeps them engaged. And then it gets any reported bugs out to our developers for remediation sooner. So, keeping engaged, is good for everybody.
Yeah, it certainly is. Brandon, do you see a lot of the same things on your side that keeps those anchor hackers, so to speak, coming back to your program again and again?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Andrew said. So communication's the big thing. Responsiveness has been a priority from day one to make sure we're trying to get those payouts out as quickly as possible. And then any internal remediation or action that needs to be taken, like that part can kind of hold off as long as we acknowledge the work that the hackers are doing. I would add some of the things that we've done that I feel has heightened our engagement or our success, would be trying to elevate the bounty pool. People like money and to get paid. So we've had very successful interactions by setting up targeted campaigns and elevating our bounty pool on specific applications that we want to add to our scope, just to make sure like we emphasize the priority on them. Going forward, some of the feedback that we have gotten that we intend to implement is to try and improve our accolades process, just really saying thank you. So like Andrew said, like viewing them as a partner, like giving them kudos on the HackerOne platform so others can see as well. And potentially even trying to introduce a swag process for our top hackers. So that should, in our mind, really help solidify them as our anchor hackers and kind of be our way of also saying thank you for all the work you're doing on behalf of the organization.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we hear from customers as well, right? Is just kind of making it fun generally, right? Um, Douglas, from the researcher side, what are you looking for in a program, and what keeps you coming back? Is any of this what Andrew and Brandon said resonate with you too?
Oh, for sure. I think they hit the nail on the head, right? It's for me, it's all about relationship. I love having a program where I've become an anchor hacker on it, and they're able to communicate when changes are coming up, when they're releasing new scope. They're able to give me a heads up when they're about to launch a campaign, so that I can clear my calendar for it. I mean, it's kind of Dale Carnegie 101, but like a drip of honey is worth a pile of money. And so if I have a program where they are just giving me accolades and testimonials about how I've affected their security program and how much their developers love the bugs I've reported, or how I've given them more security budget because the bugs I've been finding. Like that is awesome. I've even had programs reach out and thank me by offering me access to exclusive scope. So they might say, "Hey, you've been active on our program for a long time. We really appreciate the work you've done. We're about to get, or we just acquired this new subsidiary. Would you like to have exclusive access on it and hack on it for a couple of weeks before we bring it into the rest of the program?" And that is just that's a way to make us feel really important, to show us that you value the work that we're doing, and make us feel human.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a really creative approach. So love to see programs taking initiative like that. That's awesome to hear. As we take a look at this year's top 10 vulnerabilities per industry, right? We can see that the bugs that you're finding, Douglas, and you and your peers, we can see that while cross-site scripting is the highest reported vulnerability for FinServ and retail both, obviously we have both of those industries on the call today. These industries are seeing fewer reports than the platform average. So Andrew and then maybe Brandon chime in. What are you doing to reduce the number of common vulnerabilities in production? How does your bug bounty program play into this? How are you learning from what's coming through and in that inherent survivorship bias that bug bounty can offer there?
Yeah, I think the whole thing, the whole concept of defense in depth and overlapping programs, scanning our code, scanning our infrastructure, those are going to find some of the things. And then that final, the where I really do place the importance of the HackerOne partnership and the researchers is finding those other gaps. And they're more valuable because, we talk to some of the researchers and they're talking about, 3, 4, 5 steps in order to exploit something, and getting a static code scanning engine to do that they are not that complex. And so, that is one of the critical things. We've spun up a security champions program internally, and one of the things that's one of the main agenda items in that meeting is really about the latest flaws that the bug bounty program has found. One of the things we definitely emphasize is if we have repeat findings for the same flaw, or same flaw on the same platform or the same application, we definitely highlight that to, bring attention to it, make sure that, that our developers internally understand that, we're tracking this stuff, we know about it, and so, please do better, and that kind of thing. And then finally, the other part that I do is I bring awareness within the technology group at the budget level, with my peers, so that they understand, even though the bounty budget lives in my budget, but I have that allocated across their organizations and their teams, so that they know, you know, basically, how much they're costing the company in paying out bounties. And so they're motivated to kind of invest in that and make sure that we're minimizing that, making it a little tougher for the researchers. But I think that's the game we want, right? We're going to make it harder for them. They're going to find more complicated stuff and get bigger bounties.
Yeah, all the customers I talk to, right, getting stakeholder buy-in proves to be some of the toughest steps time and again for these programs. It's awesome to hear that Forge has that implemented, and not only implemented, but transparently on the financial side, right, making the motivations clear. Brandon, how does Lowe's approach this on your team?
Yeah, so we have a similar approach, just different method of execution. So awareness, I would say, is the biggest key. But instead of taking the financial aspect, which we do play that in part, we talk about the risk, financial quantification that goes into that. But the biggest thing we do is like we try to shift left all of our security as much as possible, and catch things early on in the development process. And so a big part of that is as we are finding vulnerabilities. So if we find cross-site scripting on, say, like Lowe's.com being our primary like flagship website, we know we're probably getting those on other applications that we're developing as well. So we really work to do like a root cause analysis of how did this get through? How did we introduce this into our environment, and what can we do to change it so that we're not introducing it going forward. So instead of taking the financial aspect specifically, we really try to work with the developers themselves to show, hey, these are being found by external researchers. Here's the examples and the recommended steps that they're providing. Let's work to make sure that our process going forward takes stuff like this into account. And so again, getting that buy-in, we just do it more on the developer oriented side of the house, to make sure going forward we're not reintroducing similar vulnerabilities and the program can continue to grow and improve over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely more than one way to approach this, right? All that matters is that the vulnerabilities don't reappear, right? You're learning from mistakes. That's the only um, the most important thing. So um, I did want to move into cross-site scripting a little bit further, just to help illustrate one small piece of the report and some of the breakdowns that we do within the hacker-powered security report here. But cross-site scripting, as we saw on the previous slide, is a pain point for a lot of industries in those top 10 stats. And we can see that the overall numbers for this bug are actually dropping year over year. And there's a lot of variables that go into this. But Douglas, I want to know from the researcher side, have you ever seen have you seen vulnerability types evolve over the years, right? Are you seeing more or less of a particular vulnerability year over year? Is cross-site scripting one of those, or what's going on in your world? What kind of trends are you seeing over there?
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes and no. There's one particular program that I'm thinking of. It's a private program, but I used to be able to find cross-site scripting everywhere on it, and now it's become significantly harder. I've got another program where it used to be riddled with authorization issues and IDORs and privilege escalations, and Again, that's become harder and harder. And so I think on an individual program basis, programs are maturing and they are remediating vulnerabilities, becoming more mature, more secure. However, for every program that's emerging or that is maturing, HackerOne is onboarding another company that has technology that's out of date, and so there's still going to be those older vulnerability types to find from the researcher's perspective. They're just going to be on newer programs to the bug bounty scene.
Yeah, certainly. I think SQL injection might be another one that we've seen less and less and less of over the years.
Right.
But okay, on the vulnerability side, let's flip over to talk bounties, right? How do you accurately set bounties for your vulnerabilities? What kind of factors do you consider, Brandon? Do you have the Lowe's approach and what you all are thinking about on this end?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my introduction, we kind of restarted the program this year. So building from the ground up, we wanted to keep it simple and focus more on the process of being able to, as I've mentioned, pay out the vulnerabilities as soon as they come in and then worry about remediating and actioning the vulnerabilities and working on them internally. So the bounty pool has been a afterthought. We primarily just based it around the severity of the vulnerability and relied on the HackerOne triage team to help set that. We have had discussions about trying to look more into specific applications. Like we have some applications that we care more about. Therefore, if a bounty comes in, they would be on the higher end and setting more of a dynamic bounty pool range based on severity rather than a static set amount for each specific critical high, medium, low. So we have started having those conversations and some of the things, like I mentioned, application itself, if there's other mitigating controls, the vector of attack being used, those are the things that we would take into effect. And it ultimately comes down to if this attack was successful in the wild, how likely is it to be reproduced and how easily and how impactful is it? And at the end of the day, like that's what we will plan on setting our dynamic range more targeted towards.
Yeah, okay. Ranges and that dynamic approach is really powerful. We see a lot of customers use that as well. I've also seen customers like split the bounty table by asset type and be a little bit more explicit and less fluid. So that's certainly one way to approach it. Andrew, do you have any insight on how that's done at Forge?
Yeah, it's very similar to what Brandon said. We look at CVSS primarily, but then after we get the HackerOne triage feedback, we have the architect of the platform look at it, and so as part of that, we look at like the complexity. How easy is this? How hard is this? And kind of feed that into the loop. And the other thing I would say is I also rely on HackerOne as a partner to say, where are the ranges in the industry, whether it be financial services or other industries? What are the trends? Meet regularly to review that table because back to, some of the earlier conversation, keeping the researchers engaged in the platform is really critical. And, paying market rate needs to happen in order to keep that interest up.
Yeah, and certainly we've seen that market rate, steadily move upward a little bit year over year. We have on screen here some of the averages for FinServ and retail. Douglas, can you tell us about your most significant bounty? Are there any industries that are especially attractive to you to hunt on because of their bounties, or is there some other criteria that you're looking for?
Yeah, for sure. So my most significant bounty was at a live hacking event, unsurprisingly. I actually talked about the details around that in the critical thinking podcast. But it was basically a third party account takeover where I was able to gain control of an entire subdomain of the customer because there was a vulnerability in a third party they were using. But as far as industries that are attractive to hack on because of their bounties, I mean, I think the obvious one that stands out is the Web3 DeFi industry. I mean, that's where you're going to see the 6, 7, or even 8-figure bounties, as elusive as they are. But I don't know. I've seen good programs and bad programs in every industry. I've seen uh, like Shopify as an example. They have a very, very, very good bounty table, and they're in the e-commerce or e-commerce industry. I've also seen, I'm not going to name any, but I've seen very poor bounty tables in the same industry. I mean, same with every industry, right? Whether it's healthcare or education or finance. And so it can run the gamut. I'd say aside from Web3, there's not any particular one that stands out as attractive. I kind of have to take it on a program by program basis.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense with your approach, right? It's very threat model based, very finding that immediate pain. So
Yeah,
Web3 certainly fits the bill there, and I think plenty of other industries, as you said, can waffle on their approach. So, all right. So in cybersecurity, measuring success is an elusive challenge. Like, how do you measure the impact of something that didn't happen? We hear from customers that being able to tell a story around a vulnerability has a strong impact. And Douglas, you've entertained us at numerous live hacking events with your unique and creative explanations of vulnerabilities during those show and tells, if you will, at the end of the event. Can you tell us
hmm
about your approach and the impact that it has?
sure. So as a hacker, the thing that I'm trying to communicate to programs is risk, and I think it's pretty commonly agreed that the one of the best ways to communicate anything is with storytelling. And so while there may be some mature programs that can understand the impact behind a vulnerability just based on the vulnerability type, a lot of times in order to actually communicate the value of the bug you're providing, you need to be able to provide a story and around the risk it involves. So, for example, I could report just a cross-site scripting vulnerability to a customer, and they might not see it as very important. But if I can show them that the cross-site scripting vulnerability can lead to account takeover, that's a much more compelling case for a higher bounty. A few months ago, to give another example, hacking on a I was hacking on an application in which I was able to leak millions of customers' home addresses. And I mean, that sounds scary, but I think what really sold it was the fact that this was an application that was also used by numerous celebrities. And so not only did you have a mass PII leak on this customer, I was also able to communicate the story of a paparazzi nightmare being able to leak, celebrity A, B, and C's home address. So that's where the value of storytelling has really shown for me. But I'm sure there are other hackers who might take a different approach.
Yeah, that is a very creative approach, right? Highlighting something that's a little bit more maybe familiar to the person reading the report than just your address or mine. But, thank you again for finding that and protecting all of our addresses. Brandon and Andrew, how do you measure success in your organizations, and how do you make a business case for your security testing programs? Are any of the factors on this slide part of that case that you're making?
Yeah, so I think absence of incidents is a big one. So, like I mentioned, we try to do a root cause analysis to make behavioral changes. So, if we're able to tell a story similar to what Douglas was saying, of here are the vulnerabilities we were introducing in our application, they were found by external researchers, and we are no longer seeing those in these other new applications or in further iterations of the same existing ones. That's a success story in itself that tells of the maturity of the program and the success that we're seeing by listening to our researchers. I would say the other kind of easy, low-hanging fruit to make the pitch off of is just the variety of findings, because we're flexible in how we can introduce our any hackers with specific skill sets or the amount of hackers that we want into our paid program. We get a pretty good variety of perspective, so getting the different types of findings across applications is something that you may not get if you go with a singular outsourced pen testing or even like an internal offensive security team, because then you're kind of static with the skill sets that you're leveraging. I would say the last thing is probably just the variety of researchers themselves. So whereas the variety of findings that they bring is an easy success criteria to tell the story on. Just being able to say like, hey, we want researchers in different parts of the world, or we want researchers with this specific skill set. I think that is a pretty solid business justification because in this type of industry, you always want to get new sets of eyes on your applications whenever you can to make sure like nothing's getting missed through your own internal controls or through an existing bug bounty program itself.
Yeah, that is a good story, right? Like, hey, look at this guy's HackerOne profile, look at their resume, understand like they're this level of security professional, and we're offering, this level of bounty, and they still didn't find anything, right? Like, I totally hear you. That's another great story to tell alongside the findings that are there. Andrew, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, we look through many of these attributes you have listed on the slide. I think we still look for some of the basics like, bug arrival rate and pure bug count on how many are we finding? We want to see year over year if those are increasing or decreasing, keeping in mind how much new code we're writing and rolling out. So, I think, it's really around just measuring all aspects of the program.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, every angle you can get is going to help tell that story. Another story that is uh, dominated this year and certainly maybe the last 2.5 years. This year's hacker-powered security report includes a full section on it, right? It's AI, it's generative AI, and the risks and opportunities that it poses for organizations. And one question that we hear at a lot of events and webinars is, how are researchers using AI? Douglas, can you answer that for us? How are you and your peers using AI in your work, submitting bug reports and so forth?
For sure. So I think the number one thing is code generation, right? Like just yesterday, I was using AI to write a tool to automatically look for a very common vulnerability type that I run across. Wouldn't have been able to do that without AI, or I guess I would have if I wanted to spend weeks, but I was able to write it in a day, which is just awesome. Being able to go from idea to same day application with using AI. Um, I've also used it for like payload creation when I'm making when I find a CSRF vulnerability, being able to just create an easy proof of concept to give the customer. I've used it a bit in report writing, although not as much as I know a lot of other hackers are doing. But I think the one of the best uses that I found is just idea generation. I might be hacking on a technology that I'm not very familiar with, or an application which has a very weird and esoteric like attack surface, and I might not even know how to approach it. I might not know where to be able to make the customer hurt with the application. And so being able to explain the app, explain the different features to a model and have it give me back some ideas to try is invaluable.
Yeah, I know from the hacker side, you all very repeatedly mentioned how much you love collaborating with other hackers, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and is Gen AI kind of a hacker you can collaborate with 24/7, 365 in that sense?
Yeah, and I don't have to split the bounty with it either. So it's been awesome just being able to say, hey, I've got this application that has this weird feature. I'm not really sure what this does. If you were an attacker, how would you attack this? And then it'll be like, oh yeah, you might want to try XYZ. And sure enough, there might be a vulnerability in, attack vector Y. And it's like, oh, I would never have thought about that had I not been able to just run this application through a piece of AI and have it give me some ideas.
Yeah, and I think those use cases really speak for themselves. And Brandon and Andrew, to what extent are your organizations adopting it? And how confident do you feel in staying ahead of the risks?
Yeah, so we talked about internally using some of the HackerBot capabilities through the HackerOne platform to just make our program more efficient. But overall, our primary focus has been around defining and implementing policies to ensure our internal customer stakeholders, developers are following best practices when using the tool. Something that I've heard happen to other organizations is just having their employees use like ChatGPT, for example, and putting in sensitive, confidential information that then essentially gets sent because they don't have their own instance stood up. So things like that are kind of our primary focus. As far as like researchers themselves in the HackerOne program, if they're able to use it to run their reports and their attacks more efficiently, then that's to our benefit. We reap the rewards of them being able to do that and not have to spend weeks on something that can otherwise take a day. So we may not necessarily like engage in it directly when it comes to a bug bounty program, but having the researchers on the HackerOne side engaging in it when they're interacting with our tools and applications is still to our behest because that's what the bad guys are going to do as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, right? Like you have to almost encourage these efficiency opportunities where you can because we know threat actors are certainly taking advantage too. So, Andrew, are you dipping your toes in the AI pool on at Forge? What's going on at
Yeah,
Forge?
we definitely are. I can honestly say there's not a day that goes by that someone's not trying to talk to me about bringing some new, AI enablement to either existing tools or bringing in a new tool, new software package to do something across the enterprise, whether it's, productivity gains for, internal employees for internal activities, or they want to augment some of the stuff that we're publishing, externally to our clients. And so, you know, all of those conversations result in, from an InfoSec perspective, how do we make sure that we're keeping the inputs and the outputs from those tool sets secure, pardon me, and evaluated for accuracy, especially. And we're using it today to generate some code, and so I really, we're working with our HackerOne partners to say, okay, use the AI tool to counter what we're doing in AI, and make sure that it's like tool on tool. Let's see what comes out of this. So yeah, we're definitely looking at it, and it does definitely, it's an exciting part of the business because it's amazing to me the capabilities that are coming out on both sides of all this. So
Yeah, it truly is. I guess that's why you have to fight fire with fire there, it sounds like.
yeah.
So, and so when it comes to staying ahead of the risks, certainly AI was the top concern on our initial report there, or initial slide that we led with. So, in terms of specific AI concerns, Brandon, Andrew, are there any that you would want to highlight on this slide that you haven't already, or something you'd want to really emphasize to our customers here?
Um, From my end, the main one that sticks out to me is really in the hacking AI models and deployments by malicious code. Because I do know, like, I've seen instances just on the internet in general where people basically ask for malicious payloads and stuff like that that will automatically be generated by these AI tools. So being aware of what's out there and being able to, like you said, counteract it, is probably the biggest one. Some of the other ones like injection. I think every industry out there is like trying to get their own chat box to interact with customers. I don't know if Lowe's has one yet. I know we have something similar in place. I don't know if it's AI backed, but I do know that like every industry is doing that. So I've seen other vendors that I've worked with who have theirs. So that's something that I could easily see being kind of like the next SQL injection. Like if you learn how to leverage the prompt chat box to get at the information that you want from the back end for you, then I think that's something that we'll definitely see more of in the future from people who just try to rush this stuff out the door.
Yeah, natural language injection, if you will. Andrew, anything,
Yeah. I
any,
I think yeah, I think I definitely support the training data leaks as the lead there. It's back to that human element. And it is, training people, and making sure they're reading the policy, understanding the policy of how to use the tools. That's the challenge. So, and as the AI tools themselves mature, we are seeing some more, greater kind of administrative tools be put on top of that. And so, hopefully we'll see that lighten up a little bit. The other one, I always do worry about the hallucinations. We've all heard, the big stories that hit the news about, just crazy hallucinations that can happen. And in the financial services business, when we publish something, if we're using AI to generate that, even subtleties within, our outgoing messages need to be very carefully marshaled and reviewed by, the human aspect. So I worry about those things slipping through.
Yeah, yeah, and rightfully so. I think all of these are pretty valid concerns. So um, I think we're near the end here. I just want to mention that the again the hacker powered security report does have a dedicated AI research section. You can find all of those insights and more in the report. You can go to hackerone.com/report, or I believe we dropped it in the chat, the very catchy hackerpoweredsecurity report.com for all of the insights you see on your screen and more. And now we thank you again for your time. We'd love to take some of your live questions here on Zoom or LinkedIn and see if we have any already lined up. All right. So we do have one question in here. How has benchmarking data from the report helped identify and prioritize the top vulnerabilities impacting your organization? Can you share a specific example? Brandon or Andrew, I don't know. Is there anything from Forge or Lowe's that you use in terms of benchmarking and looking at your peers and trying to understand things?
Yeah, so from Lowe's perspective, I would say the main thing is kind of what I hit on earlier, just prioritizing applications, and then potentially even like the result of the attack. So if something is going to directly impact customers, so like Douglas hit on earlier, like price changes or things like that, then that's going to be our highest priority. So anything that's uh, on our primary applications, and then the secondary would be like anything that is hitting our customers, just so that way we can kind of properly triage if we were to have two vulnerabilities come in that's like would potentially impact our customers. We know to prioritize by application. So I would say that's probably the biggest piece that we use whenever reports come in.
Okay, so maybe and when it comes to the benchmarking piece, that would be measured in maybe just severity, right? Like the
Right.
average severity or the volume that's coming in. Okay. Andrew, anything on your side?
Yeah, I think it's some similar, severity there. It's amazing how long cross-site scripting has been at the top of the list, right? And so we just continue to use, this benchmarking data, especially in our Security Champions program, to just as training and within our internal developers to say, this is the industry. These are the industry ranks. It's reality, and just bring that back to, reminding them of what to be careful of, and what tools can we build internally to then kind of eradicate some of this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So like a little bit what we talked about today, basically, right? Like a little bit that top 10 vulnerability, industry driven type of analysis. It's interesting. Okay, we have one here for the hacker, Douglas. When you are looking at programs, what are you looking at in terms of bounty tables or other factors like scope, program communication, or safe harbor policies?
Sure. I mean, the bottom line is that it comes down to time input versus money output. And so I don't mind a lower bounty table. Like I don't mind $3,000 criticals if I think that I'm going to be able to get a lot of them. And similarly, I don't want to hack on a program that has $20,000 criticals if I think it's going to take me 80 hours to find a critical. And so I think the programs that I've really seen succeed with their bounty tables are the ones who recognize that they have assets that are more hardened than others and will scale their bounty table appropriately with how hardened that asset is. And so if there's something that's been in scope for years and hasn't had any new features released in a while, then it's probably going to be a lot harder to find a good, higher critical vulnerability. And as such, the bounty should be scaled upwards. Similarly, if you're bringing something brand new that's never been hacked on, it's fine to start with a lower bounty table for that particular asset, because I'm going to be able to find, maybe 4 or 5 criticals in a day. And so I won't care if they're, $2,000-3,000 criticals, if I think I'm going to be able to get $8,000 to $10,000 in a day from them.
Yeah, very balanced approach there, and I imagine one that's driven by experience and a wealth of having looked at a lot of these program policies and tables and understanding what's out there. So,
Mhm.
let's see. Oh, we do have another one here. What strategies have you found most effective in maintaining engagement with hackers, and aligning efforts with program priorities?
Yeah.
So Andrew or
Yeah,
Brandon,
I'll,
yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
jump in on that one. I
Yeah.
think, we kind of covered it a little earlier. I think it really is, um, using the overview on the platform on, what are the key parts of your application, making sure that they have appropriate access to, credentials to get into, if it takes different credentials to get to different parts, or the entitlements within those within those credentials. It really is around just making sure. We have to remember the researchers are outside your organization. They're not privy to the day-to-day conversation. So you have to kind of, point them in the direction of where you want them to test. Now, they're creative and they're going to find all kinds of stuff. We've experienced that. We said, hey, look over here, but they find something, on a different avenue. And that is the great part of having, the researchers, have an open door to the application. But it does come down to that communication part, telling them what's going on, what's changing, keep that enthusiasm going.
Yeah, that communication one always key. Something we already covered a little bit, and definitely integral to keeping priorities, I think, aligned, right, between the two sides. We do have one more question that came in. Let's see. What does your triaging process look like, and how do you ensure timely response to critical vulnerabilities? I think we could maybe have the program side address this one. I know HackerOne does triage on behalf of many customers. We do publicly blog and talk about that. So there's a couple resources I can point us to. But Andrew or Brandon, do you want to talk about how you're viewing those that triage, second level of triage, if you will, or review that you're doing, and the response to especially critical bugs that come in?
Yeah, so I can speak to it. Whenever we have a critical vulnerability come in, it is kind of an all hands on deck situation. As I mentioned earlier, part of our process, our biggest thing is one, rewarding the researchers. So we do rely heavily on the HackerOne triage process. But we usually do a little bit of validation ourselves as well to see if there's mitigating controls. Sometimes we've seen stuff where it requires you to capture like a customer's cookies or cache in order to actually execute the attack itself. So if there's mitigating factors or like steps that like are very specific, like scenario based, then that will also like affect our urgency behind it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to um, making sure we're properly paying out the bounty to those who found it, and then just working through with our risk remediation team to basically say, hey, this critical finding came in, we need immediate action on it, and then working with our developers to remediate it and to push through changes through our like standard process to get the fixes in place.
Yeah, I would say we rely on the HackerOne triage before it comes internal. And it's back to, is this a duplicate reporting? Is there already remediation in process for a particular finding, two different researchers finding it at the same time. And so we rely on HackerOne to take care of that. The validation of the finding, following making sure that the steps are fully documented for reproducing that finding. We look to HackerOne to do all of that before it comes internal, because one of the reasons, the two aspects for using the program, one is getting that, we get the researchers are highly skilled at this. It takes a very unique personality to do this kind of work. And I never expect to really hire that internally. I want these guys and gals out there to be focused on this as their primary skill set. And that doing this across many companies gives them an edge that I couldn't develop internally. So I rely on them finding this stuff. And then I look at HackerOne to really validate, make sure it's defined, the steps to reproduce are appropriately documented, so that when it does finally get internal, it is relatively easy for my internal teams in terms of time and effort to validate, and then come up with potential remediation paths and get that in the backlog, get it prioritized and get it addressed, pardon me, as quickly as possible. So that's definitely where, that triaging process really looks at. It's kind of an efficiency play. We need to make this process efficient to go from finding to remediation as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be. And certainly HackerOne's goal is to assist customers in that. As you mentioned there, HackerOne's triage team does help with this, and we've dropped a link in the chat to a blog post that HackerOne has on how we approach triage, and certainly we have some more documentation available publicly as well. So with that, I think we're just about at time. And so I'd like to thank Andrew and Brandon and Douglas all for coming out today to join us. I'd like to thank everyone for listening if they're still um, live on the chat here. So thank you very much to everyone involved. We appreciate your insight and your time today. So thank you from the HackerOne team, and we will encourage you to check out the HackerOne report here and have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.